Welcome, friends. Tonight, we journey into the eerie world of Severance, a series that dares to ask, what would you sacrifice for peace of mind? Imagine a life where your work and personal memories are surgically severed, two separate identities sharing one body. No stress from the office follows you home, and no personal baggage intrudes on your productivity. For some, this is the ultimate dream. For others, it's a waking nightmare. This is the unsettling premise of Severance, where employees of Lumon Industries undergo a revolutionary severance procedure, dividing their consciousness into two distinct halves: their innie, who works tirelessly without knowledge of the outside world, and their outie, who lives free of any recollection of their time at Lumon. But as the series unfolds, the ethical, emotional, and psychological costs of this experiment come into horrifying focus. Episode 1: Good News About Hell. The series begins with disorientation. Heliar, played by Britt Lower, awakens on a stark conference table. A voice, calm yet clinical, asks her personal questions.
What is or was the color of your mother's eyes?
She doesn't know. This is her first moment as an innie, a consciousness born only for work at Lumon. We then transition to Mark Scout, played by Adam Scott, a soft-spoken man burdened with grief. As he sits in his car, wiping away tears, ready to start his shift at work. Mark Scout's day begins as he enters the elevator, leading him to the basement of the Severance floor of Lumon Industries. Once he reaches the bottom, we see a change in Mark, as if he were a different person now. As he travels in the fluorescent-lit, eerily sterile halls of Lumon Industries, we learn he works as part of the Macro Data Refinement (MDR) team. Mark has already undergone the severance procedure, which splits his memories into two distinct halves, one for work, one for his personal life. For his innie, life is an endless loop of office hours, with no memory of the outside world. For his outie, Lumon is a hazy unknown. Mark is called into the office of his boss, Harmony Coble, played by Patricia Clarkson, a severe and enigmatic figure whose piercing gaze speaks volumes. Coble informs Mark that his supervisor and close friend, Petey, has stepped down. To Mark's surprise, Coble offers him Petey's position, a promotion that will make him responsible for overseeing the integration of his own replacement. The process begins immediately. In a stark, windowless room, Helly R. Mark's replacement awakens at a sterile conference table. She's greeted by a disembodied voice asking her questions. Who are you? It's her first severance survey, a ritual meant to orient severed employees to their new existence. Helly's confusion quickly gives way to defiance. When Mark enters to greet her, she demands to leave, shouting for an exit. Surprisingly, Mark calmly agrees, pointing her toward the stairway door, but when Helly steps through, she finds herself right back in the office, trapped in an impossible loop. Frustrated and frightened, she turns to Mark and asks, "Am I in hell?" He denies it, though his uncertain tone offers little comfort. Helly is brought to Coble's office, where she's shown a video. On the screen is Helly herself, or rather her outie, calmly explaining her decision to undergo severance. The procedure is permanent, she explains, and she has agreed to separate her work life from her personal one entirely. Helly's innie is devastated by the revelation, her sense of self shattered by the realization that she exists solely within the confines of Lumon's walls. Mark attempts to console her, repeating the company's mantra. Every time you find yourself here, it's because you chose to come back. His words are meant to reassure, but they only deepen Helly's sense of entrapment. Later, we glimpse Mark's Audi, a man still grappling with grief after the death of his wife, Gemma. Severance has offered him an escape, a way to compartmentalize his sorrow. Mark attends a dinner party hosted by his sister Devon and her husband Rickon. Rickon, a self-styled intellectual with an overbearing demeanor, takes the opportunity to pontificate on the morality of Severance, turning the dinner into an awkward debate. Mark endures the conversation with quiet discomfort, his responses betraying an underlying unease about the life he's chosen. That night, Mark spends the night at his sister's home. As he stares out the window, he notices a disheveled man in a suit standing in the shadows, watching him. The figure disappears before Mark can investigate, leaving him rattled. The next day, while dining alone, Mark has a frustrating encounter with his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Selvig, who criticizes his recycling habits. Their conversation is cut short when the man from the night before suddenly sits at Mark's table. It's Petey, Yul Vasquez, Mark's former supervisor, and unbeknownst to his innie self, his best friend from work. Petey reveals that he has somehow reversed his severance procedure. His reintegration has left him unstable, his memories fragmenting between his innie and outie lives. Petey warns Mark about Lumon's true nature, emphasizing that the company's influence extends far beyond its walls. He slips Mark a piece of paper with an address on it and delivers a cryptic warning. Trust no one. Before Mark can ask more, Petey leaves, his mission accomplished but his health deteriorating. When Mark returns home that night, he's greeted by Mrs. Selvig, who offers her usual nosy small talk. But as Mark closes his door, the truth becomes chillingly clear. Mrs. Selvig is none other than Harmony Coble, maintaining surveillance on Mark in both his innie and outie lives. Her dual role blurs the boundaries of control, suggesting that Lumon's grip on its employees is far more invasive than anyone realizes. Episode 2, Half Loop. The episode opens with a haunting flashback. We see Helly R, unsevered and about to undergo the procedure that will divide her life forever. Mr. Milchick, played by Trammell Tillman, Lumon's unsettlingly cheerful and highly professional overseer, films Helly as she recites the video we saw in Episode 1. Milchick's ever-present smile and upbeat tone mask an air of menace. He is the enforcer of Lumon's strict boundaries, and his charm often feels like a weapon. After the recording, Milchick escorts Helly to an operating room. The scene is clinical yet grotesque, as the camera lingers on her head being cut open and drilled into, implanting the severance chip. When the procedure is complete, Milchick remarks with unnerving enthusiasm,
"I'm very excited to meet her,"
setting the stage for the division between Helly's innie and outie selves. We cut to a new perspective on the stairwell scene from Episode 1. This time we see it through outie Helly's eyes. As her innie repeatedly attempts to escape, Milchick patiently instructs her outie to re-enter the stairwell, explaining that her innie is struggling to adjust. outie Helly complies, her actions underscoring the complete separation between her two selves. Later, Milchick hands her a bouquet of flowers as she exits the elevator, congratulating her on a successful first day. This small gesture is drenched in irony, given the chaos unfolding in her innie's mind. The next Monday, Mark Scout arrives early at Lumon. His first day as supervisor is marked by a mix of responsibility and grief. While settling in, Mark comes across desk photos of himself with Petey. Overwhelmed, he hides the pictures in a storage closet, a quiet moment that reveals the deep impact of Petey's absence. As the day progresses, Mark introduces her to the rest of the team. Dylan, played by Zach Cherry, begins training Helly on her new role in macrodata refinement. Dylan's personality is sarcastic and lighthearted, often cracking jokes to lighten the oppressive atmosphere of the office. However, he's also fiercely loyal to Lumon's hierarchy, and Irving, played by John Turturro, emerges as the steadfast and disciplined member of the macrodata refinement team. He walks Helly through the seemingly nonsensical task of sorting data that feels wrong, explaining it as a process of identifying numbers that evoke specific emotions. Helly balks at the absurdity of the task, her rebellious nature already at odds with Lumon's rigid rules. A welcome celebration is held for Helly, featuring a meager cupcake. During the party, Mark confesses that he hid the photos because he's upset about Petey's departure. Helly, still determined to escape, asks if she can write a note to herself. Mark explains that Lumon has code detectors in the elevators to prevent written communication between innies and outies. Helly doesn't believe him. In defiance, she scribbles "I quit" on a post-it and rushes to the elevator. The detectors are real, sounding an alarm and stopping her escape. Milchick quickly restrains her, and Mark takes full responsibility for the incident. This brings us to the ominous break room. Mark is escorted away, where Milchick's facade of friendliness takes a darker turn. The break room is a sterile, oppressive space where Mark is forced to repeat scripted apologies for his actions. The repetition is grueling, a psychological punishment that leaves Mark visibly shaken. Later that evening, Mark's outie life comes into focus. He goes on his first date since the death of his wife, Gemma. The date starts well, but takes a turn when the conversation shifts to his job at Lumon. Mark defends the Severance program, leading to an argument with his date, who supports the anti-Severance group, the Whole Mind Collective. It's a reminder of the growing societal divide over Lumon's controversial technology. Returning home, Mark finds his neighbor, Mrs. Selvig, waiting for him with cookies. Mrs. Selvig is nosy yet warm, a seemingly innocuous presence in his life. Their conversation feels normal until the chilling reveal that Mrs. Selvig is actually Ms. Coble, Mark's boss at Lumon. Her dual identity is a sinister reminder of the company's far-reaching control. The next day, Mark calls in sick, a rare moment of rebellion against Lumon's grip. Helly, left to wonder about his absence, worries that her stunt in the elevator got him fired. Meanwhile, Milchick, Coble, and Grainer, Lumon's head of security, discuss Mark's absence in a private meeting, their tone suggesting that even minor deviations from protocol are scrutinized. Mark follows the address Petey gave him to an abandoned greenhouse. Petey, disheveled and struggling with reintegration sickness, explains his situation. He's the first person to reverse the severance procedure, combining his innie and outie memories. The result is devastating. Petey's mind is a fractured puzzle, with memories bleeding into one another. He shows Mark a crude map of Lumon's severed floor and plays a smuggled recording of Mark in the break room. Hearing his own tortured apologies unsettles Mark deeply, planting seeds of doubt about the company he once trusted. Meanwhile, Irving's storyline begins to expand. Exhausted and experiencing strange hallucinations of black goo seeping into the office, Irving is sent to a wellness session with Ms. Casey, played by Addition Lockman, Lumon's on-site therapist. Ms. Casey is robotic and clinical, reading a list of compliments about Irving's Audi, such as "Your Audi likes the sound of radar." The session feels less therapeutic and more like an attempt to reinforce loyalty to Lumon. Before the session, Irving strikes up a conversation with Bert, played by Christopher Walken, the head of the optics and design department. Bert is charming and approachable, a stark contrast to Lumon's cold environment. Their connection hints at the possibility of human warmth within the company's oppressive walls. Irving shares his encounter with Bert back in MDR, only to be met with hostility from Dylan, who harbors a tribal hatred for optics and design. Dylan recounts a gruesome legend about O&D workers slaughtering MDR employees in the past, adding another layer of paranoia to Lumon's already tense atmosphere. While the truth of Dylan's story remains unclear, it underscores the divisions Lumon cultivates between its employees. As the episode closes, Mark allows Petey to stay in his basement. While using the shower, Petey suffers a flashback to his time at Lumon, collapsing under the weight of his fractured memories. The scene is a harrowing reminder of the dangers of defying Lumon and the cost of reclaiming one's identity. Episode 3, In Perpetuity. The episode opens with Mark and Petey still in the basement. Petey appears disoriented, caught in the throes of his reintegration sickness. Mark asks if he's okay, but Petey insists he's fine, even as his increasingly erratic behavior suggests otherwise. Petey scans Mark's home nervously, questioning its security. Mark assures him it's safe, unaware that Mrs. Selvig, who is in reality Ms. Coble, is watching from her house across the street. As the tension mounts, Petey suddenly hallucinates that he's back at Lumon. His panic is palpable, and Mark struggles to calm him. That night, Mark tries to drown his thoughts in alcohol, flipping through cable news. A heated debate about the legality and morality of Severance fills the screen, drawing a stark contrast between public opinion and Mark's lived experience. It's a fleeting but powerful moment that highlights the societal divide over Lumon's controversial technology. The next morning, Mark checks on Petey, who warns him that Severance is not the healthy coping mechanism Mark thinks it is, particularly as a means of dealing with his wife Gemma's death. Petey's insight cuts deep, though Mark brushes it off. Before leaving for work, Mark encounters Mrs. Selvig, who offers to bring him more cookies. Polite but distant, Mark accepts, unaware of her dual identity. At Lumon, Mark settles into his role as supervisor. He begins swapping out the group photos, replacing images that include Petey with updated versions. Helly interrupts, casually dismissing the effort, announcing that she has submitted her resignation request and is confident her outie will approve it. However, Milchick soon enters with his trademark cheerful demeanor, delivering a series of announcements. His unnerving, performative positivity feels out of place as he reveals that Helly's resignation request has been denied. Helly is crushed. Determined to escape, Helly makes another attempt. She writes, "Let me out," across her arms in a way that becomes legible only when she presses them together. When Mark informs her that this too will fail, her frustration and desperation grow. Back at Mark's house, his brother-in-law Rickon stops by, thrilled to deliver his newest self-help book, The You Are. The book, a grandiose and somewhat ridiculous attempt at philosophical guidance, is intercepted by Mrs. Selvig before Mark can retrieve it. Selvig later hands the book to Milchick, who is instructed to inspect it for hidden messages or subversive content. In the basement, Petey's condition continues to deteriorate. His reintegration sickness manifests in vivid hallucinations and memory fractures, leaving him even more unstable. His mutterings grow increasingly incoherent, blending memories from both sides of his severed identity. At Lumon, Irving suggests a trip to the Perpetuity Wing as a way to instill Lumon's values in Helly. The Perpetuity Wing is essentially a shrine to the Egan family, Lumon's founders, with exhibits glorifying their achievements in philosophy. As the team walks through the hallways, Mark and Dylan lighten the oppressive mood with a game of Egan bingo, pointing out absurdities in the exhibits. Dylan's humor, though biting, underscores his deep loyalty to Lumon. His playful rivalry with other departments and adherence to corporate culture make him a complex figure. While en route, Irving has another encounter with Bert, the charming and soft-spoken head of optics and design. Bert's kindness and genuine demeanor create a moment of connection, but the interaction is cut short when Dylan intervenes, wary of Bert and reinforcing the tribalistic tension between departments. At the Perpetuity Wing, Irving quickly notices the bingo game and chastises Mark and Dylan for their lack of respect. During the commotion, Helly seizes her chance to slip away, running through the hallways in a desperate bid for freedom. She reaches a window overlooking the stairwell, the divide between her innie and outie selves, and smashes the glass. Holding up a piece of paper that reads, "Never come back here," she hopes her outie will see it and put an end to her suffering. Alarms blare as Milchick is alerted. He drops Rickon's book to pursue Helly, but Grainer intercepts her first. Helly is restrained and dragged to the break room. The break room remains as chilling as ever. Helly is forced to read a surreal, scripted apology repeatedly, her voice trembling as Milchick looms over her, monitoring her every inflection. The punishment is psychological, breaking her spirit while reinforcing Lumon's control. Mark continues replacing the photos and discovers something unsettling. Petey had drawn a map of the severed floor on the back of one of them. The map, though crude, hints at hidden corridors and unexplored areas, deepening the mystery of Lumon's sprawling facility. Meanwhile, Petey finally leaves Mark's basement, wandering aimlessly through the streets. He stumbles into a convenience store, his condition worsening. As the disoriented man collapses, the store clerk calls for help. Mark, realizing Petey is missing, frantically drives around searching for him. He arrives at the convenience store just in time to witness Petey collapse, his body giving out under the strain of reintegration. Mark, shaken and overwhelmed, returns home. In a grim act of self-preservation, he destroys all evidence of Petey's stay in his basement. As he attempts to move past the day's horrors, Petey's cell phone suddenly buzzes, a reminder that the shadows of Lumon are never far behind. Episode 4. The UUR. Helly begins the episode in the break room, visibly worn down as she reads the compunction statement from the previous episode. Her voice wavers and her exhaustion is palpable. Milchick, ever smiling and unsettlingly calm, informs her that the session will continue tomorrow. Helly's relief is short-lived. She steps into the elevator ready to leave for the day, only to realize that tomorrow has already arrived, and Milchick is waiting for her. She has now read the statement 259 times, and the psychological strain is evident. At one point, Helly hears what sounds like the murmuring of an old man in the room. A surreal and haunting moment that underscores the oppressive nature of Lumon's control. At Mark's house, Petey's cell phone continues to ring incessantly, a reminder of the secrets lurking just beneath the surface. Unable to face the implications, Mark stashes the phone under a sleeping bag, temporarily pushing away the noise, both literal and metaphorical. Meanwhile, at Lumon, Mark is fixated on the crude map Petey left behind. It feels like a lifeline, a glimpse into the labyrinthine world of the severed floor. Before he can dig deeper, Bert, Christopher Walken, the head of the optics and design department, stops by Macro Data Refinement. He brings tote bags as a gesture of goodwill, or perhaps an excuse to see Irving, John Turturro, the reserved and protocol-bound member of MDR. Dylan, ever territorial, bristles at Bert's presence and drives him away. However, Bert extends an invitation for a tour of O&D, which Irving, intrigued, readily accepts. Helly returns from her extended stay in the break room emotionally shattered. She has now read the statement 1,072 times. Her once fiery resistance has been tempered by exhaustion, but traces of defiance remain. At the same time, over in O&D, Irving and Bert bond further, connecting over Keir Egan's philosophies. A moment of intimacy emerges as they briefly hold hands, a quiet act of rebellion against Lumon's sterile environment. However, Irving pulls away, torn between his growing connection with Bert and his ingrained loyalty to Lumon. Back at MDR, Dylan and Helly discover Petey's map. Dylan is cautious, fearing the repercussions of defying Lumon, while Helly sees it as a potential path to freedom. Their argument escalates until Mark intervenes, making a controversial choice. He shreds the map, hoping to prevent further conflict within the team. As Irving returns to MDR, he notices a copy of the UUR left abandoned in the conference room. Concerned about the strict ban on outside materials, Irving brings it to Mark. When Mark opens the book, he discovers it is addressed to his outie, a surreal reminder of the fractured life he leads. Helly's frustration finally boils over. She grabs a paper cutter and storms into Ms. Coble's office, demanding a camera to record a message for her outie. She threatens to cut off her fingers if denied. Coble, cold and calculating, allows her to record the message. Helly walks confidently to the elevator at the end of the day, declaring to Milchick that she was never sorry. But her triumph is short-lived. The next moment, she's back in the elevator with a new disc in hand. The new video is from outie, Helly, and it delivers a devastating blow. Outie. Helly tells her innie that she is not a person and should abandon any hope of leaving. The resignation request is denied, solidifying Helly's entrapment and despair. Mark and Coble both attend Petey's funeral under false pretenses. Mark is there to pay respects to a friend he shouldn't remember, while Coble's presence is far more sinister. She is there to ensure no evidence of Petey's reintegration surfaces. They make polite small talk, each masking their true intentions. During the service, a video tribute to Petey plays, but Coble quietly steps away to oversee the removal of Petey's severance chip with a drill, a chilling act that reinforces Lumon's stranglehold on its employees. Mark meets Petey's daughter June at the funeral. The encounter stirs emotions he cannot fully process, and he becomes overwhelmed. He leaves abruptly, with Selvig Coble trailing behind. At home, Mark opens up to Selvig, revealing that he is still mourning the loss of his wife. Later, he visits the tree where she died, finding a bittersweet solace as he smiles through tears. Back at Lumon, Mark secretly reads the UUR in quiet defiance of the rules. Coble, ever watchful, instructs Milchick to call Mark in for a wellness check. Meanwhile, Irving and Bert grow closer, their long handshake hinting at the deepening bond between them. Mark's wellness session is surreal, as Miss Casey observes him sculpting a ball of clay into the shape of a tree, a subconscious nod to his grief. Coble watches from the security cameras, her gaze unyielding. Helly, meanwhile, moves with a grim determination. She collects a metal waste bin and an extension cord, her actions deliberate and methodical. The pieces of her plan fall into place, unnoticed by those around her. In the final moments, Helly steps into the elevator. She climbs onto the waste bin, affixes the extension cord to the top of the elevator, and kicks the bin out from under her, attempting to end her suffering. The screen cuts to black. Episode 5. The grim barbarity of optics and design. Outie. Helly jolts awake to a horrifying reality. Her innie has hanged herself. Desperately gasping for air, Helly struggles to free herself, clawing at the cord. Back at Lumon, Mark, clocking out for the day, becomes the first to discover Helly's lifeless body dangling from the elevator. Shocked, he scrambles to save her. But Granner, the stoic and enigmatic head of security, intervenes. Granner gets Helly down and forces Mark into the elevator, offering no explanation or reassurance. Mark, disoriented, asks if she's okay, but he is thrust into his outie state before receiving an answer. The theme song plays, a stark contrast to the haunting scene. The next morning, Mark re-enters the severed floor, his mind racing with worry about Helly. However, when he reaches the office, Helly is conspicuously absent. Miss Coble, ever calm and manipulative, informs Mark that Helly is hospitalized, but will recover with no permanent damage. She assures him that Helly will return to work in a few days. Mark remains unconvinced, but has no choice but to accept the explanation. Grainer meets with Coble to share his findings about Petey's severance chip. The test results confirm that Petey successfully reintegrated his memories, making him the first known case of reintegration. Grainer suggests celebrating this discovery, but his enthusiasm fades when he realizes Coble hasn't informed the board. Coble reveals her plan to disclose everything at once, withholding critical information to maintain control. Meanwhile, Mark secretly continues reading the UUR during his free moments. Rickon's philosophical musings serve as both a source of curiosity and a quiet rebellion against Lumon's strict policies. Mark's personal life takes an emotional turn when he receives frantic messages from Rickon. Devon is giving birth. Mark rushes to the birthing cabins, a serene yet eerily isolated facility. On his way, he briefly runs into Alexa, the date he met earlier, who offers congratulations. Inside the cabin, Mark joins Rickon, who excitedly asks if Mark received his self-help book. Mark lies, saying it must have been stolen. Devon steps out for coffee, leaving Mark and Rickon to bond. For the first time in years, Mark opens up about his wife's death, and the brothers-in-law share a rare moment of connection. Devon's coffee run leads her to a neighboring cabin, where she meets a wealthy, enigmatic woman expecting her third child. The woman reveals plans to name her son William, hinting at a privileged yet peculiar worldview. When Devon returns, Mark confides in her about Petey's reintegration and his suspicions about Lumon. Their conversation is interrupted by a sudden contraction, and Mark steps outside to sit by the water. As he gazes at the serene surface, his phone begins to ring, a haunting reminder of the chaos that awaits. At Lumon, Helly's first day back is marked by emotional devastation. She is visibly shaken by the failure of her escape plan and overwhelmed by the resignation video from her outie. Mark tries to comfort her, but Helly pushes him away, her frustration evident. Ms. Casey, the eerily calm wellness counselor, is assigned to observe Helly and prevent further incidents. The cold clinical atmosphere only adds to Helly's growing despair. Irving, meanwhile, experiences another unsettling black goo hallucination. Seeking solace, he visits Bert in optics and design. Mark advises Irving to copy Petey's map as a backup, but when Irving uses the office copier, it spits out something unexpected, a disturbing painting depicting members of macro data refinement slaughtering employees of O&D. Dylan immediately sees this as confirmation of the infamous O&D coup. Milchick, ever watchful and unnervingly cheerful, claims the painting was sent by mistake and dismisses it as a joke. Tensions rise as Dylan and Irving debate the painting's significance. Dylan is convinced it proves O&D's untrustworthiness, while Irving remains skeptical. Milchick reports to Coble about Irving's growing connection with Bert, admitting he ran a 266 on Irving to dissuade him from spending time with Bert. Coble, intrigued, praises his initiative. When Milchick questions Coble's decision to assign Miss Casey to monitor Helly, she cryptically replies that she's trying something new. Mark devises a plan to get Helly out of the office for a private conversation. He asks her to help him map the severed floor, but Helly rebuffs him, asserting that she has no intention of becoming Mark's new PD. Her only goal, she says, is for her outie to die, knowing it was her innie's doing. Their tense conversation is interrupted by a strange, shrill noise, a sound like a crying animal echoing through the corridors. Helly and Mark follow the unsettling sound and stumble upon a bizarre sight, a room filled with baby goats being bottle-fed by a harried man. The man, clearly agitated, shouts at them to leave, insisting,
"They're not ready."
The cryptic encounter leaves Mark and Helly bewildered and unsettled. Back at O&D, Bert and Irving continue to grow closer. Bert invites the MDR team to the mysterious back room of O&D, introducing them as friends. However, tensions resurface when Dylan confronts Irving about his budding relationship with Bert, warning him against trusting a rival department. Helly and Mark discuss the strange discovery of the goats, debating their purpose and significance. For the first time, Helly agrees to help Mark with the map, signaling a tentative step toward cooperation. As the episode closes, the fragile alliances and mounting mysteries of Lumon deepen the cracks in this carefully controlled world. What lies behind the strange paintings, the haunting cries, and the cryptic rituals remains to be uncovered. Episode 6, Hide and Seek. We open in Coble's dimly lit basement, a space as enigmatic as the woman herself. She places a necklace adorned with a Severance chip around her neck, a symbol of her devotion to Lumon. Grainer calls with an update. The data from Petey's Severance chip suggests the hack was orchestrated by someone named Ragabi. Coble dismisses him and kneels before a shrine aglow with candles, Keir Egan's visage looming in photographs and relics. She recites a prayer.
"Tame in me the tempers four, that I may serve thee evermore. Place in me the values 9, that I may feel thy touch divine."
The camera lingers on a photograph of a young girl, presumably Coble, at the Myrtle Egan School for Girls, hinting at a deeper connection to Lumon's founder. Meanwhile, Mark wrestles with his own demons. He retrieves Petey's phone from a box in his basement, stares at it for a moment, and throws it in the trash. Yet the phone seems to echo his unresolved guilt, a tether he cannot easily sever. At Lumon, Bert reveals a secret room filled with plants to Irving. The usually rigid Irving softens in Bert's presence. As they share this intimate space, their hands almost touch, but Irving hesitates, admitting he isn't ready. The moment is tender, filled with unspoken longing. Devon takes a walk in the park with her newborn and unexpectedly encounters the wealthy woman she met at the birthing retreat. However, the woman doesn't seem to remember Devon. Even stranger, she didn't name her son William as she had planned, but Bradley. Her husband, Senator Angelo Artito, appears uneasy when Devon mentions the retreat. He hurriedly excuses himself and his wife, leaving Devon perplexed and suspicious. Back at Lumon, Irving proposes an alliance between MDR and O&D to uncover the truth about Lumon's operations. Helly is eager to join forces, but Dylan and Mark remain wary. As tension builds, Coble summons Mark and scolds him for exploring other departments. When Mark demands to know the purpose of their work, Coble erupts.
"We serve Kier, you child."
She declares that hallway privileges for MDR are revoked, tightening Lumon's oppressive grip. Dylan and Helly discuss Ms. Casey's sudden absence, suspecting she's been sent to the break room for failing to supervise Helly. Dylan, ever the joker, asks if Helly and Mark are an item, humorously interpreting baby goats as a euphemism for sex. Mark returns, visibly frustrated by Coble's new restrictions. Irving apologizes for the conflict, and his humility prompts Mark to reconsider the proposed alliance. The MDR team, Mark, Helly, Dylan, and Irving, ventures to O&D as a united front. On security cameras, Coble watches their defiance unfold and sends Milchick to intercept them. At O&D, Bert introduces the team to a hidden back room bustling with workers fabricating seemingly arbitrary objects. Helly, astonished, remarks, "This is more people than I've ever seen." The two groups quickly realize they share a mutual ignorance of their true purpose at Lumon. As Mark attempts to rally the workers into banding together, Dylan discovers a stack of illustrated cards that appear to depict martial arts techniques. Intrigued, he discreetly pockets one. Just then, Milchick arrives and escorts MDR back to their department. Coble reprimands Mark, singing a hymn-like ode to Kier Egan before chastising him for abusing her trust. Grainer takes Mark to the break room, and as they pass in the hallway, Mark sees Ms. Casey for a fleeting moment. "I'm sorry," he whispers. Mark's life outside Lumon takes a chaotic turn. On a date with Alexa, she notices his bruised knuckles, which Mark dismisses as a workplace injury from moving a water cooler, another fabricated memory from Lumon. Meanwhile, Devon delves into Senator Arteto's background, discovering his ties to Lumon and his pro-Severance stance. She's interrupted by Rickon, who announces he's brought in a lactation consultant. To Devon's shock, the consultant is none other than Mrs. Selvig. Selvig's soothing hum, a Kier hymn, calms the baby, her dual identity as Coble, adding a sinister undertone to the moment. Elsewhere, Dylan experiences a disturbing anomaly. Somehow he's in his innie state while outside Lumon, trapped in a closet. Milchick interrogates him about the missing card from O&D. Dylan, overwhelmed by the revelation of his outie's life, reluctantly admits he stashed the card in the restroom, but doesn't know its significance. As Milchick thanks him, a boy bursts into the room and hugs Dylan, his son. Dylan is stunned, the implications of his severance crashing down on him. Milchick quickly makes a call, and Dylan is reverted to his outie state, erasing the moment. Mark and Alexa attend a punk concert, headlined by none other than Petey's daughter, June. Their conversation after the show is brief and awkward, but the encounter leaves Mark reflective. He and Alexa share a kiss, but his mind is elsewhere. Grainer reports to Coble that someone is secretly using an old research facility, and he believes Regabi is behind it. That night, Mark lies awake, haunted by memories of Petey's last moments. Beside him, Alexa sleeps peacefully. Unable to ignore the unanswered questions, Mark retrieves Petey's phone. It rings almost immediately. The voice on the other end belongs to Regabi. She invites Mark to meet her, offering a path toward the truth. Mark follows her instructions and finds himself under the research facility. Before he can fully grasp the situation, Regabi hears a strange sound and urges him to follow her into the unknown. The lines between control and chaos blur further with each passing moment. Until next time, may the truth always find its way to the surface. Episode 7, Defiant Jazz. Mark follows Regabi into her shadowy underground lab, a space cluttered with equipment and secrets. Regabi reveals that she was the one who reintegrated Petey, exposing the dangerous and experimental nature of her work. She confronts Mark about his choice to undergo severance, questioning the morality of his decision to separate himself from his pain. Their tense exchange is interrupted by Grainer, who has tracked them down. Grainer begins addressing Mark as though he's another employee from the severed floor, hinting at shared secrets. Before he can say more, Regabi strikes him from behind with an aluminum bat, killing him instantly. Calmly, she takes Grainer's management ID and hands it to Mark, instructing him to use it at work.
Your innie will know what to do,
she says. Taking Petey's phone, she tells Mark to dispose of any potentially incriminating evidence and sends him away, leaving him stunned and shaken by what he's just witnessed. At home, Mark strips off his clothes and stuffs them into a garbage bag. As he stands half naked in the kitchen, Alexa walks in, startled. Mark fumbles for an explanation, claiming he went for a drive to clear his head. Alexa senses his unease and leaves, adding to Mark's mounting isolation. At Lumon, Milchick tests the new security doors and retrieves the card Dylan had taken from O&D. He delivers the card back to Bert, cryptically mentioning final preparations and teasing Bert about an upcoming surprise. Later, Milchick confronts Dylan, discussing the previous night's overtime contingency procedure. He sidesteps Dylan's questions about his son, offering vague reassurances and minor perks instead. Dylan, clearly shaken, is left grappling with the implications of his outie's life. When Mark's innie clocks in, Milchick greets him with unnerving enthusiasm and escorts him to his desk, citing
New protocol.
The MDR room now has steel security doors, a stark reminder of Lumon's tightening grip. The entire team is tense, each harboring their own unease. At Devon's house, Mrs. Selvig is helping Devon with breastfeeding, expertly masking her double life as Ms. Coble. Over coffee, Devon shares her suspicions about the wealthy woman she met at the birthing retreat, theorizing that the woman may have been severed to endure childbirth. Selvig listens intently, subtly prying for more details. The conversation shifts to Mark's late wife, and Selvig asks if Mark ever imagines seeing her. Devon's answer remains unseen, but Selvig's probing raises new questions. At Lumon, Irving suggests revisiting O&D to strengthen their alliance. Helly is eager to move forward, but Dylan remains distracted and surly, preoccupied with thoughts of his son. Their discussion is interrupted by Milchick, who bursts in carrying a boombox. To celebrate Helly's exceptional performance, the team is rewarded with a 5-minute music dance experience. Helly selects maracas and the genre defiant jazz. As disco lights flash and music blares, the team begins to dance awkwardly. Dylan, however, remains seated, his frustration building. When Milchick's jubilant antics push too far, Dylan snaps, tackling Milchick and biting him hard enough to draw blood. The celebration ends abruptly, and Milchick storms off to report the incident to Coble. After Milchick's departure, Dylan confesses the truth about the overtime contingency to his team, Helly immediately suggests hijacking the system to escape. Mark realizes Grainer's ID card could be the key. Dylan volunteers to keep watch while Mark and Helly search for the controls. However, as they set out, Irving quietly slips away to visit Bert. Mark and Helly find the security room and begin searching for the overtime contingency controls. Mark notices on the security feed that Coble has arrived and quickly ushers Helly back to MDR. She manages to grab the instruction sheet for the overtime contingency on their way out. Irving's detour leads him to O&D, where he stumbles upon a melon party celebrating Bert's retirement. To Irving's horror, he realizes that retirement at Lumon means the complete erasure of one's innie identity. Heartbroken and enraged, Irving creates a scene, cursing at Milchick and refusing to accept Bert's departure. Back at MDR, the team devises a plan to activate the overtime contingency, which requires someone to remain behind to operate the switches. Dylan unexpectedly volunteers, determined to learn more about his outie life and his son. When Irving returns, his heartbreak over Bert's retirement fuels his resolve.
Let's burn this place to the ground,
he declares. That night, outie Mark is drowning his sorrows in another drink when there's a knock at the door. It's Alexa, retrieving her phone. Mark tries to salvage their relationship, but Alexa sees through his attempts, realizing he's not ready to move on from his wife. In a desperate gesture, Mark produces a photo of his wife and tears it into pieces, trying to prove he's letting go. Alexa, stunned, silently leaves. Alone, Mark tapes the photo back together, revealing the face of Ms. Casey. Every secret revealed casts a longer shadow. The walls of Lumon are closing in, and the truth is more dangerous than ever. Until next time, tread carefully in the corridors of the unknown. Episode 8. What's for dinner? We open on Irving, but not the Irving we know. Outie Irving is at home, engaged in a repetitive ritual of painting. His canvas is a void of black paint, layered meticulously as rock music blares in the background. His actions feel purposeful but obsessive. As the camera pans out, the room is revealed to be filled with identical canvases. Coffee brews in the background, and his movements are mechanical, almost trance-like. At Lumon, the MDR team is under pressure as they work feverishly to meet their quota. Helly, still determined to prove herself and enact her revenge on her outie, is the last one still refining data. Her obsessive focus concerns both Mark and the rest of the team, who finished their shares a week ago. Watching through the security cameras, Coble and Milchick also take notice. Coble insists on scheduling another wellness session for Mark, despite Milchick's reservations. Finally, Helly completes her task, triggering an animated message of Keir Egan congratulating the team. Irving turns to Mark, his voice low but deliberate.
So it's on now?
Later, Mark is summoned to Coble's office. They share an awkward laugh over the close call with the quota, and Coble asks who should be rewarded with the coveted waffle party. Mark suggests Dylan. Coble agrees and sends Mark to the wellness center. At the wellness center, Mark is surprised to find Ms. Casey preparing to leave. Casey reveals that she's being retired, and that her time as an innie has only amounted to 107 hours. Most of those hours, she explains, were spent in brief wellness sessions, but her time with MDR was the most meaningful part of her existence.
Why do you care what happens to me?
She asks. Mark, visibly moved, replies, "Because we're people, not parts of people. No one gets to just turn you off." Coble, watching from the security feed, cuts the video. Milchick remarks that it's fortunate Mark and Casey don't remember their connection outside Lumon, proof that the Severance chips work. Coble remains unconvinced and instructs Milchick to escort Casey to the testing floor. As Casey is taken down an ominous hallway to a hidden elevator, her fate remains uncertain. Milchick arrives at MDR to reward Dylan for his hard work, bringing an egg bar and a gift. The team has a brief Lumon-approved egg party, during which Helly offers to stay behind instead of Dylan. Dylan, however, insists he's okay with staying back. He declares this is just the first step in their fight. Irving quietly reads from the Lumon handbook, his skepticism evident as he scoffs at the celebration. Coble returns to her office to find Natalie waiting with damning photos of Helly's suicide attempt. Natalie accuses Coble of failing to report the incident to the board and subtly threatens her by mentioning Coble's unauthorized second life as Ms. Selvig. The conversation ends with Natalie firing Coble. Reeling from the betrayal, Coble storms out of the building through the stairwell exit, visibly unhinged. Back at MDR, Helly and Mark discuss their plans, their camaraderie and determination deepening. Their conversation is interrupted by Milchick, who abruptly ends the party, citing an urgent management issue. The issue turns out to be Coble's dismissal, as Milchick escorts her out of the building. Coble leaves, but not before casting one last glance at the place she once controlled. With the team's plan in motion, Dylan prepares to stay late for the waffle party and use the opportunity to activate the overtime contingency. Before stepping into the elevator, Helly pulls Mark into a passionate kiss.
In case we don't come back. Or, I don't know, in case we do.
The much-anticipated waffle party is revealed to be an unsettling experience. Dylan is served a large plate of waffles alongside a glass of milk. After eating, he dons a mask of Keir Egan and is joined by 4 scantily clad dancers, each representing one of the tempers. The surreal performance borders on the grotesque. Dylan manages to slip away unnoticed, his resolve unwavering as he heads to the control room. Meanwhile, Coble drives home in a fury. Her anger boils over, and she destroys her Keir Egan shrine, ranting about her dismissal. Her breakdown is interrupted by a knock at the door. Mark is there, awkwardly inviting her to Devon and Rickon's party. Coble hesitantly accepts. At the party, Mark opens up, revealing his growing doubts about Lumon and confessing that he's considering quitting. Coble, emotional and desperate, tearfully urges him to get away from the company. Outie Irving returns home, greeting his dog before resuming his obsessive painting. This time it's clear. The black canvases depict the elevator to the testing floor, a haunting revelation about Irving's subconscious. In the control room, Dylan sets down the mysterious gift he received earlier. It's a holographic glass cube featuring the MDR team. With determination, Dylan positions himself at the switches, struggling to hold them both down simultaneously. After a tense struggle, he succeeds. The innies awaken. The walls are crumbling, and the truth waits to be unleashed. As the pieces fall into place, Lumon's carefully guarded secrets are about to face the light of day. Stay with me. There's only one chapter left. Episode 9, The We Are. In the season's stunning conclusion, Mark wakes mid-conversation with Ms. Coble, masquerading as Ms. Selvig, but his shock at seeing his former boss quickly gives way to a more startling revelation. He has a sister. Irving, meanwhile, is in his home, painting obsessively in black, his dog Radar by his side. Helly finds herself in the middle of a glamorous dinner party, her confusion mounting as a guest casually introduces her to someone unexpected. Gabby Arteta, the senator's wife, whom Devon met earlier in the season. But it's the introduction that follows that leaves Helly reeling.
This is Helena Egan.
While Dylan struggles heroically to maintain his grip on the two switches activating the overtime contingency, OTC, Mark, Helly, and Irving begin piecing together the truth. Mark, still disoriented, ducks into an empty room at Devon and Rickon's house, only to meet his baby niece for the first time. The moment is overwhelming, but he doesn't get long to process it as the evening's main event. A reading of Rickon's new book, The UUR, commences. Mark's awe deepens when he realizes the book that has shaped his innie's thinking was written by his brother-in-law. As he listens to Rickon read, Mark's emotions flicker between admiration and dismay as the lines between his innie and outie selves blur. Irving begins exploring his house, a stark contrast to the corporate sterility of Lumon. He discovers a room filled with war memorabilia, medals, a Navy uniform, and a photograph of a young man labeled Dad. Beneath the trunk storing these relics, Irving uncovers something more alarming. Severance-related newspaper clippings, Lumon documents, and a list of severed workers. Among the names is Bert, whose address Irving hastily memorizes. At the posh Lumon event, Helly is reeling. It's confirmed that she is Helena Egan, an heiress to Lumon and a potential future CEO. The reality of her severance sinks in. It was a public relations stunt meant to demonstrate the safety and ethics of the controversial procedure. The attendees, unaware of her innie's presence, treat her as a paragon of the company's values. Her pre-recorded video praising Lumon's mission plays on a screen, fueling her growing rage. Helly retreats to a bathroom, staring at her reflection as panic sets in. Her father, Lumon's shadowy patriarch, enters and cryptically reassures her of her destined role, hinting at a larger plan to sever the entire population. Before she can respond, she's called to the stage to deliver her speech. In the mirror, she repeats the compunction statement she was once forced to read in the break room, steeling herself for what's to come. Back at the party, Mark attempts to confide in Devon. They discuss Lumon, the innie protocol, and the loss of Mark's wife. Just as Mark is about to explain more, Devon reveals that Coble, whom Mark now recognizes as his boss, has the baby. The two frantically search for Eleanor, their panic mounting. Meanwhile, Milchick is racing against time. Coble has already informed him of the breach, and he encounters Dylan's makeshift barricade in the security room. Armed with a pocket knife, he begins sawing through the belt Dylan used to secure the door. Milchick tries to manipulate Dylan, offering him perks and even information about his children, revealing that Dylan has 2 more kids. But Dylan, fueled by newfound resolve, refuses to relent. Irving arrives at Bert's house and watches through the window as Bert celebrates his retirement with another man who appears to be his partner. Heartbroken, Irving pounds on the door, desperate to confront Bert and perhaps seek some closure. Helly steps onto the stage, Coble's words echoing in her mind. Just before, Coble had grabbed her in a last-ditch attempt to intimidate her, warning that exposing Lumon would harm her friends, not the company. Helly brushes her off, determined. On stage, Helly begins her speech, but immediately veers from the script. She declares that she is an innie and that severance is a lie. The technology doesn't create a better work-life balance. It creates a prison. Her words send shockwaves through the room. Back at Devon's house, Mark finds a picture of his wife among Rickon's belongings. The recognition hits him like a tidal wave. It's Ms. Casey, the severed wellness counselor he worked with at Lumon. Mark's voice rises in a crescendo of emotion as he screams for Devon. She's alive. In the security room, Milchick finally breaks through the barricade and tackles Dylan, ending the overtime contingency just as Helly's revelation reaches its peak. The innies are switched back to their outie selves, leaving the final pieces of the puzzle dangling tantalizingly out of reach. The season ends on a cliffhanger, with the innies' rebellion exposed and Lumon scrambling to regain control. This is the harrowing tale of Severance Season 1, a series that masterfully intertwines corporate horror with human vulnerability. As we await Season 2, the questions linger. What is Lumon's true goal? Can the innies find freedom? And how far will the outies go to protect their secrets? Stay tuned, and until next time, may your memories always remain your own.